So immediately following this, there will be a community discussion to continue this conversation to a broader group of people. I am honored to serve as the moderator. I want to thank the conference planners for being nimble into adding this on, because when this conference came up, I was like, it's no way we can have this conference and not talk about COVID-19 and the civil unrest and the uprising. So thank you for being nimble. Thank you for the panelists for jumping right in and developing this at the last minute. So before I turn it over to the panelists and we have a panelist and a discussant, so they're going to be introducing themselves. I just want to read this prepared statement just kind of to frame the session. It says, the nature of activism requires sacrifice and risk. Obviously, so many of these activists are so fed up with the injustices of the system that they are willing to put their bodies on the line despite the threats of police power, arrest, and the pandemic. And with all these threats, it is because of system injustices, Black and brown bodies are most at risk. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the panelists. And if you want, just go, in order of does everybody have their schedule? Just go in order of the schedule and just introduce yourselves and give a little background, and then we'll dive right into some of the questions. The first person I have is Dr. Leonard Jason. Just introduce yourself, and then we'll go, and everyone will introduce yourself, and then we'll go into the discussion.
Yes, thank you. My name is Lenny Jason. I'm at DePaul University and happy to be part of this panel. Thank you for inviting me.
And did Johnny Mullins join yet? I don't see, so we'll skip over to Dr.
Oh, I'm here. I'm here.
Johnny Mullins, how are you? Hey, all right. So can you just introduce yourself?
Yeah, okay. Well, I just left a heated situation. I got my little organized shirt on, but yeah, Johnny Mullins, Chicago native, National Lewis PhD program, architectural engineer. My focus is gentrification and trying to reduce homelessness in America. But I'm from Inglewood, Chicago, where they say everything is going crazy. So I'm out here in the streets doing all that stuff too, but understand the issue. So thank you guys for having me as part of the panel.
Thank you for joining. And Erica Mingo is next. Dr. Mingo.
Hello, everyone. I'm Erica Mingo. I'm faculty at National Lewis University. I teach in the Applied Behavioral Science program as well as a little bit in the community psych program, and also consider myself an activist for a long, long time. And I'm just very excited and honored to be on this panel and to be sharing this conversation with all of you.
Thank you. Dr. Palmer. You're on mute.
That might help. Hey, everybody. How are you all doing? I hope everybody is well, considering the pandemonium and pandemic that's going on right now. I am a co-founder of Community Wellness Institute and adjunct faculty at both National Lewis and Adler University. And I am a NLU alum as well. Good to see everybody.
Thank you. And Dr. Rivera.
Hello, everyone. My name is Rafael Rivera. I'm the Deputy Director of the Bureau of Prevention Services at the Illinois Department of Human Services Division of Substance Use Prevention and Recovery, and recent alum. Well, 2017, I guess, is not that recent anymore, but time flies. But a recent alum of National Lewis University, and I am very honored to have been invited to this panel. Thank you.
Thank you for joining. Dr. Thomas.
Hi, my name is Dominic Thomas. I'm a Scholarship to Practice Fellow at the University of Michigan. I work with their National Center for Institutional Diversity, and I'm also co-chair of the Council for Cultural and Ethnic Racial Affairs for the Society for Community Research and Action, and I'm also the associate editor of the Community Psychologist, the newsletter.
Thank you for joining. And I have a final person listed as a discussant, LaShawn Latrice. Dr. Latrice? Okay, when she joins, I'll introduce her. So let's dive into the first question. And we have a set of prepared questions, but we also can have this discussion, open up just organically and talk about things that we think are necessary to talk about and to hash out a little bit further. The first question is, should race matter? And anybody can answer this. Everybody does not have to answer it. Is there any difference dying from COVID-19 and dying of police brutality? Should race matter? And that's for anyone. Come on, panelists.
So I'll be happy to throw a couple words in. Lenny Jason, DePaul University. The one thing that is critical is that individuals who are African American, who are Latinx, are more likely to die of COVID-19. We know that. The data's in. We also know that in terms of police brutality, the same groups are the folks who are going to be more likely to have become victims of the police. So there are some real commonalities in these two things. The death is a death. That's the bottom line. And that's the thing that we're here to try to prevent.
Anyone else want to weigh in?
So I just wanted some clarity a little bit, because when I saw the questions, and thank you so much for giving them in advance, I did have a moment to kind of reflect on them. And so to the question that is there any difference dying from COVID-19 and dying of police violence? My first thought was actually, no, I don't think there's any difference between dying from COVID and dying of police, because you're still dead. That was my first initial thought. So that's why I needed clarity around what is the question asking. Does race make a difference in dying from COVID and police violence? Give me a little bit of help there.
So the way I interpreted, and I did not develop the question.
Sure.
So if someone is on the line, if they develop the question, they can chime in. But I'm thinking it's getting at the issue of systemic racism and systems and policies that basically make these things almost, the same. I mean, the dying from COVID-19 and the racial burden impacting African Americans is not surprising at all, considering all the barriers that contribute to it, which is very similar to the systems in place that support and even promote police brutality. I may be incorrect, so whoever actually developed the questions, you can chime in.
Okay, yeah, no, that makes sense. So I think that one of the things that we're looking at is, I think we're looking at the root behind both. So let me say this. I think to some degree they're both avoidable, where they are avoidable basically, because when you're looking at COVID-19, you're looking at race-based, a race-based situation that's very seldom acknowledged, for one thing. And I'm thinking about, immune systems, and I'm thinking about constant discrimination against Black African Americans. And so I'm thinking about stress, which then comes stress, if you want to look at it from that angle. And then stress leads to that weakened or diminished immune system. So it stands to reason that Black African Americans would be dying from COVID-19, but it's not because they're Black African Americans, right? To that extent, because there's nothing biological about race. Okay, when you look at it from that space, and so the root. So we have to. So when we say, well, yeah, they're dying disproportionately, from COVID-19, I think that should be an additional thought to that should be, well, why? Right? Not just because, there's hypertension or there's these pre-existing conditions, but I think you have to go to the root of where stress, et cetera, comes from. And that's what's not acknowledged, that we're talking about race-based in this situation.
Sorry, if I could interject and weigh in on the biophysiological, kind of mechanisms behind COVID-19. For starters, I'm not saying that African Americans aren't faced with obstacles toward decent healthcare, or disproportionately like don't have those like non-essential positions where they can work from home. But I have read some research on UpToDate relating to the COVID-19 receptors they bind to, the ACE2 receptors. And there's some evidence to suggest that people of African descent do have more of the receptors that do make them more susceptible to contracting COVID-19. And I think that is like an important thing to keep in mind, but like I also think that it pales in comparison to again, systemic racism, that denying them the healthcare that they need.
There is no such thing as Black diseases.
Oh,
There's no such thing as Black diseases, like sickle cell that they want to attribute to being Black. That's no such thing, because if you look on, and I'm not going to think about the island that it is, they have sickle cell the same as Black do. So I have to refute the fact that there is no Black diseases.
And
one of the things that I'd like to clarify is, this is Raphael, as far as this issue, we also have to think about the differences between mortality and morbidity. And so, for example, right now, the Latinx population is, in Illinois at least, having a much higher level of positive cases. But as far as mortality, we have to go back and look at this from the issue of health disparities, because I really feel that what COVID has done, and other potential outbreaks that might happen in the future, is that it really highlight health disparities to the point that it magnifies the biases in our healthcare system. And when I think about police brutality, I think that Mr. Floyd's death is really another example of ongoing institutionalized lynching processes that have been in place from an oppressive society. So both of these things are traced back to historical worldwide processes of colonialism, basically of one group seeing itself as having a God-given right to others' property and others as property. And so this, if we go back, we really do see this as a result of colonialism from way back when.
Right, because when you attribute this type of social issues to Black diseases, then you really are, in William Ryan's point, blaming the victim. You really have to stay away from that, because what you're really still saying, it's African Americans' fault. Let me finish. So what you're really saying is it's Africa, and I know that may not be the way that it's coming out, but this is the problem with systemic racism, is it's still centering the issue, the problem, the death, the killing, as it's African Americans' fault. And I'm not saying that you see that right now.
But I feel like I'm communicating it poorly. I agree with you.
No, well, I don't know that it's communication, Brandon. Actually, I think it's socialization more so. That's the way that we've been set up. That's the framework. And so when we continuously buy into that framework, or we continuously perpetuate it, it has root, it has meaning. For example, what were we talking about the other day in class? I cannot think of the word or the term that we were talking about, but I think what happens is when we don't understand the root of where terms come from, and ideologies, however you want to frame it, and where they come from, we kind of just repeat it, but it still has that systemic racism and anti-Blackness framework really in it. And when you think about it, you're still saying Black diseases, right? In that instance, I don't know if that makes sense, but flushing it out.
Well, I see where you're coming from. Okay, so this is again, I'm not remotely an expert on molecular biology, but at the YMCA, my neighbor is well, actually, he just finished his residency program in psychiatry, and he's been dealing with a lot of the COVID pandemic, and that's what he told me, that there is like not a racial, like again, I recognize that race is a social construct, but there are some ethnic implications for some diseases, and it's possible that people of African ethnicity are more susceptible to it. And I'm not trying to pin that on their just inherently like the way they are. I'm not trying to stigmatize. I'm just saying that just by like genetic lottery, they have more ACE2 receptors on their heart and cardiovascular system.
But then you have to go to why again. But if you were being discriminated against on a continuous basis, and what is that? Somebody help me with the allostatic load, et cetera, that we're talking now, stress. If you're dealing with that and you're dealing with stress all of the time, you are dealing with a continuous diminishing of your immune system. I just want to take you a little bit further than the surface.
It's allostatic load, and it's the research. It's the research of Bruce McEwen at Rockefeller University, who's done significant amount of research on allostatic load and stress, and the cumulative effects of the entire body over the period of lifetime. He's published significant neurological as well as physical research, and I'm happy to forward.
Excuse me. I believe this first part is supposed to be a panel, and then we're going to kind of move into a discussion in the next hour. So maybe let the panelists speak.
And then I was also going to mention too that, and please forward that, the reference, because I would love to see it. But, we are focusing more on like the systems of it, because we can debate biology and contributors, and those contributors are still part of systemic racism. But we want to get at the core of the matter, which is like, African-American people, brown people. I was just sitting in a talk where brown people were saying, the community was saying that, a lot of times they're working in service jobs like African Americans, and they're less likely to have maybe a union or something like that. They can't stay at home and work from home. They have tighter living quarters and those kind of things. So even before you get to the biology, there's always already these social dynamics that, you have to be exposed to get it in the first place. So why is it the exposure? Before you get to the biology, you have to look at the exposure, because you're a first responder, because you're in the service industry where you're in close contact working with people, because you're at a job that maybe you don't have a union, so they're not as stringent to, making sure that you have personal protective equipment. All of these things were exposed in a survey around very early on. Chuy Garcia had one for the Latinx community. There was one for the African American community. So it's a lot of social factors around this. But let us move on, unless somebody has a dire point, to another question. Looking at what's been going on with the uprising and the civil unrest and the protests, how can we help people around the world recognize that all this courage, rather than look at this as courage, rather than seeing activists as thugs? We're going to move into the protests and the civil unrest around George Floyd's death. How can we harness this to have people stop portraying these people as thugs? Because that's what the media narrative from a lot of different sources.
Well, I'm gonna jump in on that one real quick, because I had this conversation this morning at the barbershop where they were protesting again this morning. And I posed a question to everybody that basically says, like, how can you call a person, dumb or stupid for burning down his own community, right? And then I pose the same question to say that, how could you say to that same person, do you have the proper understanding or education that teaches you the difference between right and wrong, right? So a lot of these people that are out here burning down things or doing stuff or whatever the case may be, you can call it conspiracy theory, you have to go back to, like everybody said, the disparities in African-American communities are basically coming home to roost, right? These people are uneducated. They don't know how to express their emotions. I'm one of them. Like Brad and everybody at National Lewis has helped me to express my emotions by breaking this stuff down to me in a more formal way. But sometimes my energy just let loose, and I'm just ready to just scream and tell. I just finished cursing out my boss because he said some ignorant shit on, stuff on, to me about this whole pandemic. We want to donate $1,000 and give it to you so you can go help the community. It's like, what the dude? Like, that's not the issue. So I think that, people need to just start understanding that you are, part of the problem is people not understanding, and people who are behind systemic racism, these are the results that you get. People who don't know, people have no idea, these young adults have no idea what they're doing, but they're just trying to get your attention to say, help me, give me some health care, give me some quality education. Let me understand how to make a living out here. It all boils down to survival of life. This is no different than being in the jungle. If you was an animal, you have to survive. You're gonna do what you got to do to survive. So, that should clear it all up. That you are part of the problem if you don't understand that these people are just trying to get your attention to say, help me. That's what I was saying.
I agree with that. And it's also an issue of how so much of what we're getting in terms of information about the protests and how everything is framed through particular media lenses. So you can see like the serious disparity or difference in how the media talks about the protest from channel to channel. So there's not even like consistent message or portrayal of like what's going on. So you have one network that's saying, oh, it's all outside agitators. And then there's another network saying that, oh, it's the Russians, or it's another network that's blaming it on something different. So there's not even a consistent like portrayal that people are like getting in terms of, okay, how are people really looking at the activists? And it's also just no one has been listening to a lot of people. And when we say, oh, they're burning down their own communities, like I'd ask us to really like think and consider who is it that's saying that message, they're burning their own communities. Is it actually someone from the community who's saying that? Or is it just some media pundit on TV just saying they're burning their own communities without actually knowing like what their community is that's supposedly being burned? Like I know downtown, I know here in Atlanta, people are talking about, oh, you're burning down your own community. And, the mayor got T.I. and Killer Mike to come out here and say, oh, this is Wakanda. Atlanta's been good to us. But I asked them, like, tell that to all the Black homeless people that are in Atlanta that get shuffled around so that nobody has to see them because we want Atlanta to be like this shining light of the South. Tell that to like all the Black people who moved to Atlanta who think that Atlanta is like the Mecca, but then have to move back to where they came from because they can't afford to stay here. Has Atlanta been good to us? There's a lot of people who say no, and they don't get heard. We only hear from we only hear from power. So it's also who is telling the story? Is it people on the ground from the actual community? Or is it like these famous celebrities and rappers who are brought in to just calm folks down? Because I'll tell you one thing, like, don't nobody live downtown. Nobody lives in downtown Atlanta. So when people are like tearing up their community downtown, there's nobody who actually lives downtown. It's all office buildings and stuff. There's no one who actually lives downtown. And it's just the message that keeps getting like perpetuated in the media that we don't really think about how that's influencing why people are thinking like that and who's telling this story. It's the same story over and over. They're burning their own community when it's like, I don't consider like Nordstrom their own community. That's like a high-end fashion store that probably a bunch of people couldn't even afford to like purchase anything in, let alone consider it part of the community. So it's just all the ways in which it's being framed that are just like, that's really messing with like the interpretation that people are having about this.
Yeah, that's a good point. the framing of it, the different agendas have a lot to do with how it's framed, the different messaging. Are there any other, any more input around how, we can help people to change this view? The narrative is a huge one because a lot of people, they're just parroting back what they hear on different television, stations. I think social media has done a pretty good job, depending on who you follow, with kind of, posting things to show the blatant differences of how things are being reported. But what are some other mechanisms?
So, Curry, I just want to say that Dominic and Johnny are absolutely right, what they've just said. And I think the message is, if you protest, basically, you're a good citizen, you're American. If you do anything else, then there's something wrong with you. You're either this or that, but you're not American. And that type of dichotomous thinking I hear on the media. When I hear it, which is, of course, a fallacy, as we all know, I get on the phone. I call them up. I start having arguments. I've had some producers I've talked to, and I just have a discussion to try to sort of say, you are absolutely hurting people when you do that.
Excellent point.
I think
if I may. The media is such a powerful entity, right? It controls what people see and what they think. So, I think that there is a concerted effort to really change the narrative, to take, my son just walked in, to take focus of what the real issue is and put it somewhere else. And I think that's a big part of it, because the issue that we're talking about is so uncomfortable for a lot of people that a lot of them want to change that, to deflect from what that problem is and put it somewhere else. It has to be, well, they're the problem. So if you notice in the last few days, most of the conversations has been focused more so on, the looting, the burning of the buildings and everything like that. And people are trying to make the police brutality secondary. And I think that's such a problem that we're having right now. But looking at social media, and I've been very involved in that, I think the way that we can really combat it is really to continue streaming these other pictures. It's not just Black people who are looting. We have white people, we have everyone out there looting. And so we have to continue to repost to, combat that narrative that is being pushed. But I do think it's concerted. And the media know exactly what it's doing when it's pushing those narratives.
Erica, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I was just thinking again, the frame that we have is really important in being able to decipher the messages that we're getting, be it from the media or social media or anywhere else, because oftentimes, if you're a Black person and you're looking at the media through if you're a Black person, you're looking at the media through a white lens, and you're mostly concerned with through a white gaze, and you're mostly concerned with how white people view you and your actions. Are you viewed as respectable? Are you viewed as good? Are you viewed as right or just? As opposed to figuring those things out internally, and internally both within yourself and within your community first, without placing so much importance and significance on the white gaze. Like for me, I think that that's just the biggest issue that has to be overcome by those most impacted by this rebellion, because we are so concerned often with whether or not how respectable we've seen. I've even saw a march that's coming up in Atlanta where folks are supposed to dress up in their Sunday best and harken back to some 1960s photo op. I mean, it's just embarrassing, because that's somehow, those people had hoses turned on them too. Those people had dogs turned on them too. And despite that, even if there were never any hoses and dogs, we have to stop formulating our agenda based on someone else's approval or disapproval of what it is that we want to do. We have to divorce ourselves from a white agenda, the white gaze, and think about what is best for Black people in this moment and beyond, and use it, look historically, and we have to look into the future. We have to analyze now based on our best interest exclusively first. Then and only then can you begin to consider whatever happens externally. But that's a long ways down the road. And unfortunately, for many of us, we're more concerned with the white gaze and how we come off. Are they calling us thugs? I really don't care what you call me. I care about power.
Either.
I don't care about if you approve of me. I don't care if you see me as human. I don't care what it is that you think about me. I will control, and I do care about how I'm treated and how my people are treated. And so as we move beyond all of the simple pleasantries of this thing and the reversible, to Dominique's point, not say, oh, Atlanta is Wakanda. That's in the Marvel universe. There's no such place. Why are we pretending and playing these silly games? So when we can divorce ourselves from trying to figure out how we can position ourselves to uphold a system that has been nothing but oppressive to us for a very long time, when we can divorce ourselves from those kinds of ideas, it don't matter. I personally don't care. You can call me anything you want to call me, but you're not going to treat me any way you want to treat me.
I have to totally agree. I totally agree, Erica. And when I thought about this question, the first thing I thought about was it's fruitless to me to try to change the narrative of people, of other people, white people. You know, we have to stop responding and reacting to white people. That is just number one. And then two, if that's the case and we move away from caring about being called thugs or whatever the framework is, then we can start engaging in our own communities where the result of the work can focus toward racist policies, etc., right? Where then you can start making some, if it's systemic racism, we've got to start making some systemic changes, particularly at the policy level. But if we keep focusing on, oh my goodness, you've called me a thug or anything else, we never get over there to the work of real change. I'm like Erica, I could care less about that. That is insanity to begin to even try to change the narrative, or even as the question said, to help people recognize courage. And that's not my response. That's not my call. That's not my call, is to help white America recognize courage rather than a thug, because they're gonna make up something else. That's not productive in this case. So I absolutely agree with Erica on that.
But that has been the issue forever. I mean, it doesn't matter. Throughout, every time there's a protest and anything happens, that's the narrative that comes up. So yeah, it really doesn't matter. They're going to do it anyway. It doesn't matter it doesn't matter what you do. There's going to be a narrative that is going to be, portrayed negatively. And I don't think that can be
final comments. I'll let you do the final comment on this one, and then we'll move to the next question. Dr. Thomas, are you frozen?
Oh, sorry. I was just making sure. And I think also it's like intellectually dishonest and like contradictory to what's actually happened in history, and like the types of events that are lionized in like history classes, like all through school. So what was the Boston Tea Party?
Right.
And, the quickness to, denigrate and downplay any rise or any type of like civil unrest that's a little out of hand. Like I think about like the Haitian Revolution and how they actually destroyed so much of like the means of the production, because that was the way in which they prevented their colonizers from being able to reproduce themselves, and that's what helped them win. So sometimes property damage is like totally isn't just like, random like violence. It's also sometimes like strategically planned, because once again, think about the structures that we've been seeing like on fire during these protests. They've been banks, they've been police stations, they've been other like centers of power. The Treasury Department here in Atlanta got broken into. Like these are all like symbols of power that people are like destroying and symbolizing that these are power structures that have been key in our oppression. And, you see what happened with Minneapolis. Like they burned a couple of police stations there, and look what happened. They're disbanding the police. So it's also just like dishonest in terms of like what's actually happened throughout history, and not really being cognizant of the fact that sometimes like even if we don't want it to happen, violence is what makes change happen. Like Frantz Fanon wrote about this in Wretched of the Earth. Sometimes violent oppression is met by violent rebellion. And then we also have to think about like, what is violence? Is it violent to burn down a building, or is it violent to go through your whole life being surveilled by outside forces who would rather bust you upside the head with a billy club than actually like protect you from actual harm? What is violence?
And shifting gears, still on the subject of violence, but shifting gears a little bit, the next question is, how does the pandemic compound the violence toward vulnerable communities of color? And violence can be, you know, police brutality, or there's the lack of necessary resources. How has the pandemic compounded this violence? Anyone?
You know, I'd like to speak to that, the way that violence is compounded and other issues. But much of the answers to many of the questions is wrapped up in an end game philosophy. Like, what is it that we ultimately want? And it's difficult sometimes to think about a world without white domination and control. And so as long as you don't control if you have no autonomy over the necessities of your life and existence, and every time, indeed, Black people in this country have moved in that direction, those efforts have been scorched to the ground. You can reference, you know, of course, Black Wall Street, Rose Book. So this is not about what are the disparities and how can we combat this or that small disparity. Those when we're left to our own devices, we combat those disparities all on our own. And we don't necessarily need Western intervention in order to be well, in order to thrive. So really we have to ask ourselves, are we willing to look at the overarching changes that will reduce vulnerabilities across the board? Across the board. So yes, of course, things are compounded because there's always these half measures taken at our actual liberation and well-being. And when Black people rise up in whatever capacity and actually fight for all of the things that we claim we want for the Black community, it is quickly squashed. And even some of those who claim to want it are silent. And then when things go back to a comfortable status quo, then we can begin again by wondering how can we get to these better conditions. When we know that we know how to, there's just some very deep-seated things standing in our way. So then we have to say, well, how do we combat the ideology that the system that is the systems of oppression in a pseudo post-slave society that still is underneath extraordinary domination and white rule? How do we balance that out? And I think that there's a fear around imagining a world without that paradigm. And unfortunately, that fear is on both sides. And until we can address that fear and think about the long term and whether or not we're willing to move beyond how white people rule and start to ask if they should rule, then we're going to be finding ourselves asking a whole bunch of questions about the nuances of our oppression, but we'll never be talking about freedom.
So just to add, that was excellent, Erica. I think, this again, Lenny, Jason, violence is epidemic. COVID might be an epidemic, but violence is epidemic. And what Dr. Perkins kind of brought up is what's underlying this. And we're really, I think, getting to the first order versus second order issue. We're looking for second order change. We're looking for getting rid of the prisons that basically have millions of people that are having violence perpetuated on them. We're trying to get rid of the educational disparities, because if you are in certain areas of this country, you have 3 times the budget for educating youth. We're trying to get rid of basically the opportunity disparities economically for jobs. These are fundamental issues. And yet, what do we get? When we ask for these second order underlying things that need to occur, they're all dealing with economics. What do we get from society? First order change. And let me just kind of suggest what first order change is real quickly. Private business sector feels compelled to issue pious pro forma messages rather than be mobilized to act via money, political influence, or job readiness and training.
Thank you. So I'm getting messages about the time. We have 5 more minutes. So Amber, is someone going to be reading any of the group chat, or can we continue the discussion? Because I think I see several questions, and I know someone was supposed to be.
So yes, so most of the, we're gonna take the discussion to the community discussion after. So just to have the focus of this session really be about the panelists dialoguing around the questions. And so we can transition to our discussant.
So is our discussant online? I want to introduce Dr. LaShawn Latrice.
Yes, I am online. How are you all?
Hi, thank you, welcome. And just introduce yourself.
I am LaShawn Latrice, and I was asked to be discussing for this session. The first part of the session, I did not hear that well because I had poor internet connection, so that's why you saw me popping in and out offline. However, I welcome the continuation of transitioning this to another session, you know, to the community session. And I apologize, I have a baby in the car. So I just wanted to say, I came in and out and I heard some of the questions, but I think this session could be honest and give the feedback that we want to give regarding how race plays a role in where we are right now. So I just think that to continue it on to the community discussion, that's what I was looking forward to, is the open discussion so that everyone could kind of chime in.
Okay. So we have only maybe about 2 more minutes, and I have in the chat box that someone wanted to hear a little bit more from Johnny. Is Johnny still on?
Oh yeah, I'm here. Yep. Can you hear me?
Yeah, so we were just, I had someone that wanted to hear from you. We have 5 more minutes, and just kind of talk about your experiences and just share some more of your insight on this topic of the pandemic and you know, police brutality.
Yeah, no problem. Like, you know, like
on the ground.
That's right. I'm boots on the ground. So 1 foot in, you know, in the community, but I say that's both feet. So I'm from Inglewood, like I said, and like I said, my National Lewis family have helped me to polish up my rough edges, if you will. But what I'm doing is I'm basically using my own self as research, right? So I come from like being homeless and all this type of stuff and just working my way up, and now I'm an architect because I was homeless and all that crazy stuff. But now I've actually got opportunities to sit at the table, right? To sit at the table where these decisions are supposed to be made, these political decisions of how money is dispersed to certain communities, the redlining, and all that type of stuff. And what I'm starting to find out is that some of these people that we elected as our leaders for Black communities they just don't get it. They are just so unconnected, disconnected to the community that is killing me. And what I've learned, jumping from science and problem solving, and Brad will beat me up about this because I came to community psychology to solve a problem that exists in all communities. And I was told that, oh, you just add on to the research, you don't solve anything over here. I'm a scientist. I solve problems. I build buildings, I design stuff, I solve problems. And I'm not gonna stop until the problem is solved. And right now, I feel like the community psychology community is the biggest gang that anybody would fear dealing with. We have connections and ties to so many people because we come from all walks of life. We are the biggest gang. If I was to get like Dr. LaShawn on the phone, she can reach out to about 300 people. You know what I'm saying? Like I can get 400 people. Like we can go and test stuff up, right? But we don't have to be violent. We need to just basically tell our leaders that you're not doing a good job representing us because the same problems keep existing. And every time I hear somebody say something like, oh my God, I don't know what we got to do, but we got to do something. It just makes me want to throw up because we can solve the problem. And what I want to share with everybody was I'm part of this organization called CCAC, Chicago Community some crap. But what they do is they come together and they do research like we do as community psychologists. And they go into the neighborhoods and do all of this research and come back with this data. And then they present this data to the mayor and the governor and all this type of stuff. And they make decisions based off of what this group of people are handing them. I'm like, that should be us. That should be National Lewis, DePaul, whatever. Anybody in the community psychology arena, we should be telling our politicians exactly how to do this. We understand how people move. We do this. Nobody else. That's why I'm here to say that I needed some more members of my gang, and I chose the community psychology community to be my gang, and let's go make change. Solution driven. I don't want to hear no more excuses about we better do something. We don't know what to do. It took so many years to get here. It's going to take so many years to solve it. Scratch that, man. This is a simple solution that we need to get in the room and figure it out and push it in somebody's face. That's all I got to say.
Thank you for those closing words. So we're about out of time. We're going to be continuing this conversation at 5 o'clock where more group, anybody can weigh in outside of the panel. Is there anything that any of the panelists would like to close out before we transition over? We'll have a 10-minute stretch break and then we'll start back up at 5 o'clock with the whole group discussion continuing this conversation. But do any of the panelists have any final words before we close out? We have 1 minute.
Just thank you for everybody participating in this talk. It's not easy, but people came. Thank you for that.
I agree. Thank you. We've had, we had over 60 participants at one point, very well attended. It's a heavy conversation, but it's a conversation that we have to have, and I think we're in a safe space to have it. So thank you so much. Have a 10-minute stretch break and then come back to continue this dialogue. Thank you so much.